All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Bokeh Podcast. I am your host, Nathan Holritz, and it is good to have you here. Now, for those of you that are listening to the audio version of this after the fact, we're actually currently streaming live on Facebook, facebook.com/Bokeh Podcast. And soon, hopefully, we're going to also have that same call sign for our YouTube channel, our username, handle, if you will, for YouTube, our YouTube channel. We literally just started this a couple of weeks ago. And so what we're going to do is ask you, if you will, and I'm going to actually pop this up on screen really quick. If you just go to YouTube and type in Bokeh Podcast, and you'll see the channel pop up right here, of course, with that really bright, colorful logo. If you'll just go to that channel and subscribe for us, once we get enough subscribers, we can actually set up that dedicated username for the Bokeh Podcast on YouTube. But we are streaming live there now. YouTube.com/Bokeh Podcast will be the URL when it comes out. And then certainly on Facebook.com/Bokeh Podcast, we are live there as well. So welcome. And for those of you who are live streaming, again, on Facebook or on YouTube, don't hesitate to ask questions, make comments. You can send us funny emojis if you'd like. This is meant to be a two-way conversation, not only between myself and my guest, but also for you, those of you who are listening or watching live. We'd love for you to ask questions all along the way. We're going to hit some really interesting topics today, including how my guest, Paula, has actually created and ultimately run a successful business in a relatively short amount of time. We're going to learn the principles behind that quick success and growth. And really, on that note, I should go ahead and introduce our guest today. Paula is here with me. And Mikayla Kovacs, thank you so much for making time, not only for myself, but also for all of our community.
Thanks so much for having me, Nathan.
Well, it's good to have you here. And first of all, we had some really compelling conversation, I have to say. It's been, about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, so it's been a little bit, but I got off that phone and you left me quite curious. First of all, you're a highly driven individual, not only a photographer, but ultimately an entrepreneur. And that's inspiring to me. And I'm excited to be able to share what you've learned in a relatively short amount of time with our listeners today. So we're going to get to that here in just a little bit. For everybody listening in, I'm going to pop this up on screen for those of you viewing as well. But if you go to Paula's Photos, PALAS photos.com, you can see Paula's website there. We're going to talk about her brand here in just a second. You can also go to Photos by Paula Mikayla, Mikayla on Instagram. I've also popped that up on screen for those of you who are watching live. Paula, we're just going to jump right into it. The first thing that I want to talk to our listeners about is your brand position. What is your brand position statement? And maybe along with that, if you just a little bit of context, let our listeners know what marketplace you're based in as well.
Yeah, so I am actually on the traditional unceded territory of the Syilx First Nations. So I'm in Kelowna, BC in Canada. And my brand is essentially, I tell everybody that I'm your favorite third wheel. So I just want to make all of my customers feel as comfortable, or my clients feel as comfortable as possible in front of my camera. And that has allowed me to capture my share of the market, which are people who are just know that they are not comfortable in front of a camera, which is the majority of people. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That sums it up. Well, and as you were saying that, I was pulling up your Instagram account. I'm going to actually share this with those of us, or those of you who are watching live currently on your Instagram profile. And this is one of the things I actually recommend when it comes to brand position for our listeners. You have that position statement right there, plain and simple. First thing there in your Instagram profile. My name is Paula, your new favorite third wheel. And, a lot of photographers talk about this concept of helping their clients feel comfortable with them in order to develop a great working relationship with them, and in some cases even a friendship. But I think it's talked about so much now that it's easy just to kind of glaze over the idea. I'm curious specifically how you create that environment for your clients.
Creating that environment starts at the beginning of the shoot. It starts before they even book with you. So explaining to them what the shoot is going to look like, and what you can implement during the session to make them feel comfortable and almost distract them by the fact that they're having their photo taken. If you know what I mean. So giving them so many things to do that they don't have time to concentrate on the fact that somebody's in front of them taking their photo, right? Like I almost never will pose my clients and get them to hold one position for a long, that would be a terrible position, but hold one position for such a long time that they start getting tense and frustrated. So in the beginning of my shoot, I tell them straight up, like, I will tell you what to do the whole way. I will direct you the entire time. You don't need to worry about what to do with your hands or like whether or not you got a double chin. Like I will tell you all of those things the whole time. Like I just need you guys to have fun. And I just need you guys to go along with all of the silly things that I'm going to ask you to do, because I promise you that they're going to give you really, really good photos. Okay, and that usually relieves them, because people like to know that I've got their back, that I am doing everything that I can to make sure that they look good.
Sure. I guess on that note too, I'm curious well, first of all, the notion of being silly, what does that look like? Is there there are kind of tricks that you use during a session to help them lighten up and laugh a little bit and relax as a result?
Yeah, so I mean, it usually starts with the same old boring, like walk and look at each other. I'm mostly going to talk about couples because I mostly photograph couples.
Sure.
But like walk and look at each other, and then everybody does the infamous drunk walk, which is you make them pretend that they're going to be drunk. But you don't just say, okay, now pretend to be drunk. Like you say, okay, I need you guys to be actors right now. And whether or not you drink, I want you to be the drunkest person that you've ever seen in the world. Yeah. Like I want you to stagger in all different directions, but then you also let them know, like, don't bend over completely because I want to see your face.
Yeah. It's funny you actually say, like, even if you don't drink, because I think about, like, the number of times my parents don't drink, my grandparents don't drink, and the number of times I've seen them imitate someone being drunk, despite, as far as I know, at least minimal drinking in their past. It's kind of funny how we as humans, we've seen enough of it, whether on TV or movies or in real life, that we know how to mimic that. So it seems like it's something that would work for really a wide audience, regardless of whether or not they're drinkers or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Getting them to do things like have a hip check contest, like who can hip check the hardest without hurting each other.
Sure.
There's tons of different things that you can get them to do, and a lot of it has to play off of the couple themselves. So I put together a questionnaire that asks them all about them as a couple so that I can best direct the shoot, right? Like I ask them whether they're introverted or extroverted, or if it depends, like what their comfortability level, is that what a word? Yeah.
Sure, in front of the camera.
With intimacy in front of the camera. And kind of things like that, like whether or not they're outdoorsy people or if they're couch potatoes, like how can I best craft this photo shoot around their personality kind of thing. So
it's interesting you bring up the intimacy thing, because, and I think I've told this on the podcast before, there was a couple that I photographed. I shot weddings for about 10 years, for anybody watching or listening who doesn't know. And there was a couple that I worked with at one point that I still remember so vividly. I went to do their engagement session, and I didn't know. And maybe ultimately, I guess I'll take responsibility for not having asked the question that you just talked about previous to the session about PDA. But this couple, and I think more the groom than the bride, was super uncomfortable with any kind of public display of affection. So the photos ended up looking like something out of a junior high dance or something, except even worse. I mean, it was so stiff. It was so bad. It's good to have those conversations ahead of time. I think that's a great recommendation for all of our listeners, just so that we're aware and we know how to approach that session. By the way, as you were talking about your brand position statement, Randall, thanks for listening in and watching, Randall. But Randall says, I like that. It's a pretty cool brand position, and sounds fun. And that idea of a third wheel, you used the word distract. And I actually like that concept, because somebody who's not used to being in front of the camera, it would be very easy to just kind of fixate on that lens staring at you. I'm actually staring at a lens right now. My camera's pointed at me, staring at that lens and just kind of freeze, not know what to do. And so the idea of relaxing enough that emotions are going to come out, you're going to connect with your partner in a really intimate way, that seems like such a foreign concept. So if you've developed a relationship with them, help them feel comfortable enough that you literally distract them from the fact that there's a camera right there, I think that's a great goal for all of us who are photographing clients.
Yeah, especially when, 90% of the people who I work with have never had professional photos done before. And it's daunting. Like, I don't like having my photos taken either. Like, I still get this like crazy Popeye thing going on whenever a camera's in my face. And I think that's why I've been able to capture so many clients, because I've had so many referrals from past clients saying like, yeah, it was a breeze. Like, it was easy. We didn't feel like we were in a photo shoot. Like, she just had us do stuff and all the photos look great.
Well, and speaking of, and I have to give you legit props, because I look at a lot of photography. I mean, I've been in the industry for about 20 years, and certainly as I'm interviewing photographers, you've got truly beautiful, beautiful work. For anybody listening in, if you're listening to the audio after the fact, go back and watch the live stream, or just go to Instagram.com/photos by Paula, P-A-L-A, Mikayla, M-I-K-A-Y-L-A. But I'm actually streaming through your Instagram feed on our live stream here for anybody who's listening to the audio, and we're looking at these pictures. But it's beautiful, beautiful. And you've got a nice finish to the images, but it's not overdone, like too dark and moody or too contrasty. I think it sets a really nice tone to the images, and there's quite a bit of variety as well. But the interaction that you're getting from your couples is just really, really lovely.
Yeah, thank you. The trick is take them on like a 20-minute hike so that you've got lots of time to get to know them before the shoot. I drill them with questions. I try to get to know every single thing I can about them so that I can incorporate all into the shoot. And then on the walk in, that just gives you lots of time. And then another thing that might not be easy for a lot of people, but I'm an extreme extrovert, so it's really easy for me. But I get a little bit vulnerable with my couples. So I'm totally open. I'm totally comfortable sharing like everything about myself because it starts conversations. So I share something a little bit personal about myself, and then in turn they share something a little bit personal about themselves, and we click a lot faster. Can
I ask you about that? Because it's like a culturally in thing to do, to be vulnerable. And I think it's good that culturally we're having this conversation, whether in the US or in Canada. But at the same time, there are people, and we all see this, like it happens on Facebook, people that kind of overshare, right? So like from your perspective, where is that line? Maybe you could even give an example of something that you would share with your couples that would kind of open that conversation.
Yeah, so I mean, it all depends. Usually, because I'm Indigenous, so I'm First Nations from, as I mentioned earlier, from near Whistler, and usually the conversation starts with, where are you from? Oh, well, I'm from here. Well, where are you from? Well, I'm from this small reserve where I grew up that nobody really knows about, and people are genuinely curious to know about what it's like to grow up as an Indigenous person in a place that was filled with genocide. Or they have no idea about the genocide that happened in Canada and in the US. And so we kind of have that conversation kind of about that, and then they talk about whether or not they knew about it, which is usually they're kind of like ashamed of almost, or they talk about like how much they hated it. And that's just one example. Like there's lots of different things that I could talk about that's in my personal life that they can also connect with. But I leave it at that. Like I only share one thing about my life. Other than that, I'm like asking them everything that I can about them so that I can get to know them on a very personal level and personalize their shoot and have a story to tell about them later.
Well, again, your work is beautiful, and it speaks for the environment that you're creating for your clients. So props to you for that. I have to say, for all of our listeners, I know we promote a topic. Today we're going to get Paula's feedback about how she's created this business that has grown so quickly. I have, and Paula knows this because I sent her the outline of questions ahead of time. I have like the first, I think, 5 questions on the outline that I normally send our guests. It says rapid fire, and I'm so bad to to continue to ask more and more questions about each of those questions. We end up spending so much time on the so-called rapid fire questions. I've got to work on this, but the information you're sharing is really great, and I think the perspective is good. both the concept of, creating, I mean, certainly the idea of a third wheel, but what we're talking about is developing a relationship. How do you do that? And I even just like that word distraction again. Like, how do you create an environment, a relationship with the client, which becomes a distraction from the fact that there's a camera in front of you? I love the idea of actually taking them on a walk to wherever it is you're going to photograph too, to help give time to set that environment. Anyway, really great stuff. But we need to keep moving because there's a lot of information here to cover. So let's go to the next thing. And we're talking about customer experience already. Is there a particular principle or idea that's really important to you when it comes to creating a great customer experience for your clients?
Well, I worked in the food and beverage industry from when I was 9 years old until I was 22.
Wow.
So growing up, knowing that you make better money if you're really nice to people, I think kind of just stuck with me.
Okay.
If anybody's listening in like a country that doesn't take tips, they're probably not going to understand that. But
sure.
I just know that you always have to give your customers or your clientele a really good experience. Like your reviews on Google and on Facebook and Wedding Wire and wherever you're receiving reviews mean everything to your business. And always making sure that you make sure that they are happy and that they are always happy. And if not, that they understand what's going on.
Okay.
That's of utmost importance to me. Like, I've made mistakes in my business.
Sure, we all have.
I have just admitted it to my clients and apologized profusely and did whatever I could to make it better. I gave them a free photo shoot or a free extra images, or I paid for their prints and I shipped them to their house. Whatever you need to do to make that relationship good at the end of the day, like, that's always going to be worth it. And I think that unfortunately a lot of business owners kind of let their pride or their ego get in the way, or integrity. I'm not sure what word I'm going for. And
I think ego is a good word there. Yeah.
Yeah, and want to defend themselves as people, but don't put their business first and foremost. Like, I'm still gonna go home at the end of the day and complain to my boyfriend and tell him like, oh, like this person was such a pain in my ass. But but my clients are always going to leave happy no matter what. So that's the long answer to what could have been short.
Well, no, it's fine. You said something that I want to go back to. You talked about making sure they, quote, know what's going on. Are you talking about managing expectations there as far as what the process looks like, how it all works?
What I meant with understanding is if maybe I miscommunicated something, or we just had a miscommunication, that they understand that I'm doing my best not to do wrong by them, and that just that they understand the whole situation without having to get into like an angry tone.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, like you just try to explain something, and if they still don't get it, even after the 5th time of explaining, you still do it in a polite manner, because again, their experience means everything.
Well, and I would add to that too, because this is something that I've seen as a business owner. It's easy, in fact, in interacting with our clients, I think probably multiple times at this stage, but when they're trying to communicate something to us that we don't quite understand, or this might happen in interpersonal relationships as well, the other person says the same thing, and you say, but I'm not sure I quite understand, and they just repeat themselves, and then they repeat themselves again. And of course, there's this breakdown in communication, because rather than trying to explain it in a different way that actually resonates, they just keep saying the same thing over and over again. We have to be careful as business owners not to do that thing, and understand that not every one of our clients communicate or understand ideas in the same way as the next person. And I think that's really important. It's certainly important to personal relationships, but it falls true as well with business relationships. Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing, oh, sorry, that's not supposed to be on. Another thing is I try to use, I think it's called empathic listening.
Sure.
Or sympathetic listening.
Empathic listening would make sense, yeah, where we're trying to put ourselves in the shoes of the person on the other side of us.
Yeah, I listened. It was in the book of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And
sure.
What you do is you just explain what you think that they're trying to say, to them and say, am I correct? Or like, is this right? And then usually like if you explain it in a different way, then usually that gets resolved. I've had that a few times. So I just
that's something a therapist will do too. I've been to therapy myself in the past, and something that a therapist will do is encourage that when you're talking about a relationship with somebody else, this is what I heard you say. And then that person can respond and either affirm that that's indeed what they were trying to say to you, or clarify. And so that's a great approach. I think it's a simple idea that probably would make a lot of people feel really great as well, that you're taking the time to show that kind of empathy. Let's keep going though. We're going to actually totally switch topics. Let's go to time. And really a big part of our focus here on the Bokeh Podcast has to do with time management, the application of business principles in an efficient way so that ultimately we can have more time in our lives. Is there a particular principle that you've applied to your business when it comes to time management that's enabled you to have a little bit more freedom, time with your boyfriend, time for yourself, maybe time to do things that are going to actually grow your business more effectively?
Yes. So a few months ago, I implemented the 4-day work week. And for some people that sounds crazy. I definitely did, because I worked every single day for like a year and a half.
Sure. I'm already excited though. Tell us more.
Yeah. So the 4-day work week, you can read, there's books on it, studies, and it basically just makes you way more productive on the actual 4 days that you're doing work.
Sure.
So the studies that were done were on like, if you cut down one day, are people less productive? And it's no, like people actually do the same amount of stuff that they normally do, but better and faster on the 4 days, and then they get 3 days to recharge. So that's been really, really great for my mental health and my productivity. And then I also set up my next day of work at the end of my previous day. So I'll write down a list of about 3 to 5 things that I know that I need to get done the next day. So when I get into the office, I already know what I'm doing, and I can plug away at those. And I just love lists. I love crossing things off of lists.
It feels good.
It feels so good. But yeah, those are my 2 time tricks, I guess, that have allowed me to be extra productive. And I don't know. I put everything into my calendar, like absolutely everything into my calendar. So it's pretty easy. So
do you take 3 days off in a row, or do you, like, how do you schedule that extra day off?
Monday to Wednesday I take off.
Nice.
Because photo shoots and weddings are on Saturday, Sunday.
Sure.
And then when you want to go out and do stuff on your days off, everything is like dead. I don't like other people being around. So
okay.
So
need a little
whatever. Space. Yeah, well when you go camping, like I don't want the whole campsite to be used up. So
fair enough.
It's nice.
So in order to make that happen, how do you handle communication? Because I can imagine a lot of your clients or potential clients are going to communicate, well, all the time these days, but certainly Monday, Tuesday. Do you have some type of an autoresponder in place? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so I turn on an autoresponder on Sunday when I'm done. And so anybody who emails me says that, hey, I'm probably not going to get to my emails. These are my days off. I also have an assistant who responds to emails with me. And honestly, I don't care if it's my day off. I will respond to inquiries as soon as I get them, because people respond better to people who they like, professionals that they're trying to hire, when they're like quick to respond to you. Yeah. So every inquiry that I get, I respond almost immediately.
Interesting. Okay, so even those days off, then you're leaving email notifications on or text notifications on and still responding to those?
Just the inquiries.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, just the ones who are like new projects. Just because I like to have lots of business.
Well, that's great. I was just trying to figure out, I mean, because I know a lot of photographers would hear that, and 4-day work week, and oh my goodness, you're not working Monday, Tuesday. What do you do with all the communication? That would be a big point of apprehension probably, and there would be a sense of FOMO. And in fact, to that point, I guess the other question I have would be, like, a lot of people, myself included, if I see, in fact, I turn the badges off on my apps, so I don't see if there's X number of notifications on my email app, or the only one I leave on is my messages app on my iPhone. But Facebook and Instagram and any of the other apps, I just turn off the badges. I don't want to see that. is there some temptation if you see that number of emails coming in to go in there and start responding to them? Like, how are you able to set aside what I think a lot of people probably describe as anxiety of not responding during those extra couple of days off?
I've hit burnout a couple of times, really, really, really badly.
Yep.
To the point where I was just under insane mental distress.
Okay.
Snapping like all the time.
Sure.
And I never ever want to hit burnout like that again. So I'm totally comfortable looking at my email or like seeing the notifications and not responding to the ones that I don't need to respond to. And only responding to the inquiries. And I use HoneyBook, so it says inquiry right at the beginning of the subject line.
Brilliant.
So it's pretty easy to see which ones are inquiries.
That's great. Yeah, shout out to HoneyBook too. That's really great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you talk about this, the burnout process. It reminds me of a principle that Tony Robbins talks about. He talks about how basically everything we do in life is driven by pain or pleasure. And on the pain side, pain a lot of times is what causes us to make change. If that pain is significant enough, impactful enough, then we make change. What you're describing then is enough pain, unfortunately, that you had through burnout that you were like, you know what, enough of this. I'm not going to continue to feed into what has led to this burnout. And what I want to encourage all of our listeners to do, number one, is to take that lesson from Paula, because it's important that you do. I mean, I would love for all of our listeners to avoid that burnout, but also apply the principles that we're talking about here on the podcast for those of you listening in, because it will enable you to avoid that burnout. When we talk about efficiency, it may sound a little nerdy, a little geeky, but applying those principles is what helps minimize that as business owners. I think that's super important. Thanks for sharing that, Paula. I really appreciate that.
One more thing is it's super important to make a cutoff. So do not work past whatever time works for you. I don't work past 6 p.m. because it gives you a deadline. Like, you need to get all of these things done by 6 p.m. so you're not focused on anything else. And then after 6 p.m. for me anyway, like, I log out. I am done for the day. I relax. I don't look at my phone. I don't look at anything else. And that is it. And that allows you that time, as long as you can perfect it. It's hard to set those boundaries, but it allows you that separation from work and relaxation, because it's so important to relax.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. We could probably spend a lot of time there too, because I've definitely had personal experience from burnout, even recently. So I get the thought process. Again, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing those principles. And I think that's super helpful for our listeners. Let me jump to, I guess along those lines, we talked about time management. Delegation becomes really important when it comes to efficient management of our business, having a little bit of time back on our lives. I mean, we talk about it quite a bit in the context of editing on the podcast, naturally, because I also own Photographers Edit. But are there things that you've experimented with in your business, delegating, giving to somebody else to do, to help manage all that you have on your plate? Yeah,
so I use Photographers Edit. I started outsourcing. I started using Photographers Edit really quickly, really early in my business. It's really nice because in Photographers Edit, you can, I'm telling everybody else, you obviously know this, Nathan. But
no, I appreciate that. I didn't plan on this conversation, so I appreciate you sharing.
It's super helpful because you can still be in control of what you would like the photos to look like at the end. So you don't need to send in just one preset and then just hope that it turns out what you would want it to. Like, you can edit, like, I only edit maybe 5 to 10% of my photos, and I make them look exactly like how I would want them. And then you flag those ones or change the label color and then send those in. And then they just do a color correction across the board and do all the tedious work for you, which saved me so much time. And you can put that time back into your business. And I spent my time learning more about directing and learning more about marketing and learning anything, really. But sure. It's also nice to not completely hand off your editing, because I feel like you learn so much about photography when you edit your own images. And just being able to see where I don't know, the lighting could have been better if I was over here or whatever it is. Yep. So outsourcing editing is huge time saver. And realistically, what is it, 24 cents an image or something for color correction?
Yeah.
So what is your time worth? right? Like if that would take me probably 2 to 3 hours to edit an entire album, like just a regular photo shoot. I can do so much in 2 to 3 hours, and outsourcing that only cost me usually about like $12 to $14. 2 to 3 hours of my time is worth at least like $750. So you got to like weigh out, what does your time worth for you? And that's the whole basis around outsourcing, is like, what's this job's value, and what's your time's value? Like if this job's value is worth less than what your time is valued at, you should probably be handing that off to somebody. Or also, if it's just something that you don't enjoy doing, like I personally am not a very good writer, so I outsource blog writing as well, because it stresses me out. I don't want to do it. So yeah, that's my tidbit on outsourcing.
Wow. Well, again, thank you. You're super generous and all those very kind words. But you touched on a couple of points, which I think are really important to note for anybody who's not only delegating editing, but really anything. Number one, especially as it relates to editing, you were talking about how you still maintain a little bit of the editing yourself, the 5 to 10%. And that does a couple of things. For photographers listening in who are like, oh man, I'm just not sure about giving up my editing to somebody else. Number one, it still gives you a bit of control, right? And then our editors are able to see what you've done and mimic that, which is brilliant. It's great. Two, it still creates a certain amount of awareness, like you said, regarding your photographic technique, your skills, and you can continue to work on that. I absolutely know what you're talking about, Paula, because I face the same thing as a photographer. It's nice to be able to see that work and say, oh, I could do this a little bit better, make this adjustment. My business partner and I used to we used to have these little competitions, because we would actually, we both were shooting Nikon, but we named the prefix of the files with our initials. So we'd import the images, and then it was like, oh, who took that picture? Is awesome. Who took that picture? And we quick check the prefix of the file to see who had gotten the picture. But it's nice to be able to see that work and have a bit of competitive drive to continue to get better. I think that's really, really great. So I'm glad you highlight that. The other thing you mentioned too is that it gives you the opportunity to learn, more time to learn. And learning translates to growth as an individual, as a business owner, which translates to growth as a business. And I think that's super important as well. So wow, we're just going to clip that section and just run it as a commercial for Photographers Edit and pay you some royalties or something.
Deal. I'll hold you to that.
That was really great. No, thank you very much. And shout out to everybody, or shout out to Photographers Edit. For everybody listening in, I'm going to pop up, of course, the URL on the screen, photographersedit.com. If you have any questions, you can check that out. But thank you for that, Paula. One last question before we get to the main topic. An impactful book, self-help book, business book that you've listened to, maybe read. What's a favorite?
How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. That is always the first book. That's the first book that I had my EA read. That's the first book that I'll have like anybody I hire read, because like I said, the customer experience is the most important thing. And anybody that you're dealing with in general, like you will get way more out of life if you read that book. I just love that book so much.
I've read it, and it's crazy because it's like 100 years old, but the principles still apply, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's so good. If you listen to it on Audible, it's hilarious because it's so old. Yeah. It sounds super old.
Sure.
I love it. There's lots of books that I love. I'm listening right now to So Good They Can't Ignore You.
Oh, okay. Who's that by?
It's another, I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's basically the principle of like you just need to be the best at whatever you're doing, and the business will come.
I've actually pulled up Amazon here. Is it Cal Newport? So Good They Can't Ignore You, Why Skills Trump Passion?
That's who it is. Yeah.
And the quest for work you love. That's okay. Very cool. We'll link to that in the show notes for everybody listening in.
Yeah, that's another really good one. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is really good. There's a little bit of spirituality in it, which some people might be turned off by, but those would be my top 3, I think.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And Randall commented again, he said, I've listened to How to Win Friends and Influence People like 10 to 20 times. And the principles really are kind of timeless. Very, very basic, but it's funny how sometimes we just need the basics laid out for us in a way that's easy to consume. And that book does a great job of it. So that's a really great recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that everybody I wish that everybody would read that book, honestly. Just in regular day-to-day conversations and in dealing with like any tough situation. That's mostly what it is how to deal with a tough situation. And always get what you need out of it, really. He tries to make it sound like you're just being a nice person at the beginning, but really it's like, how do you deal with a situation that's tough by still being nice and polite and still getting in, and always actually getting whatever it is that you want out of it, because people are much more receptive to kindness and politeness than they are to like yelling and aggression. So
it's amazing how that works, isn't it?
Yeah. And how few people actually realize that.
Yeah, it's easy. I mean, I'm an emotional guy. It's easy to get caught up in the moment, but you're right. At the end of the day, who's actually going to, at least for any kind of ongoing time period, pay attention to somebody who's yelling or blowing up or exploding? It's not productive at the end of the day, as a general rule, and certainly doesn't play on the idea of the golden rule, which is a large part of what that book is ultimately highlighting, right? It's how are we treating others? We would want them to treat us this particular way. How would we want them, how should we treat others? We would want them to treat us a particular way. Why are we not doing the same thing? Really kind of centers around that idea. I think if we were to sum it up, generally, that's what that book is largely getting at. One of the things he talks about, I think, in that book too, is the significance of using somebody's name. Doesn't he talk about calling somebody by their name and how important that is?
There's so many of those little tricks at the beginning of the book, but calling somebody by their name makes them much more likely to be receptive to you and to just like you, really, because we just like to have our name said.
It's a funny thing. It's just like almost psychological trick, but you're right. Like we feel some type of significance when we hear our name called. And I think a big part of it is because most people, when they interact with us, whether personally, like an acquaintance or a good friend, you don't normally get to hear your name. They're just talking at you. When you actually hear your name first, there's this kind of internal light bulb that comes on and you're like, oh, they're paying attention. Like I mean something to them. They're talking to me. I'm here. And I've done this at like Walmart, for example. You walk into a grocery store and you go up to the checkout and that person's right there in front of you and they're just kind of almost robotically scanning food in or scanning groceries in, and they're not used to somebody actually taking the time out to engage with them on a personal level. And the moment that you call them by their name and just respond to whatever it is that they're doing or ask how their day is going, it's incredible that how that can actually create a shift in their day, how it can lighten them up a little bit or light them up a little bit. I think it's the most fun thing to do.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's a good reminder for our listeners. We'll make sure to link to those books in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com for everybody listening in. I want to get to our main topic though. And this may seem a little bit cliche for some of our listeners who maybe saw the title ahead of time. How do you build a business or grow a business quickly? Of course, at the end of the day, and you already highlighted this, Paula, this is not about not working. You've put a ton of work in. But what I'm really curious to get to are some of the big ideas that have enabled you to grow the business relatively quickly. Because I think these are principles that our listeners might be able to apply to their business, whether they've been in business for a while or just getting started. Before we get to those principles, those very specific principles, though, give our listeners a little bit of context, maybe a little bit of a backstory about how long how you got started and then how long you've been in business. Because I just want them to have that for context before we get into the principles.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started learning photography in August of 2019. And then very, very quickly, well, actually, that's not how it happened. I was in school for business in 2019 for business and marketing. And I had always been everybody's favorite employee. I've been working since I was 9 years old. I'm a really, really hard worker. I always made people lots of money. But as soon as I got to the point where I wasn't allowed to make any more decisions, or I just didn't have enough authority, like I was just out of there. Or if they didn't have anything more to teach me, I was sick of the job and I left and I got a different one. And I got tired of doing that. And I decided, well, I live in Kelowna. There's tons of weddings here. I'm really good with people, so I guess I'll become a wedding photographer. So in August of 2019, I just went for it. I started watching every single YouTube video possible. I was in a very deep rabbit hole for like months.
It's easy to do that for sure.
Yeah, I just watched all the YouTube videos. Shout out to Taylor Jackson. Love that guy.
Yes.
I subscribed to his membership, and it's super worth it. And implemented a lot of the things that he said. Within my first month, I started making some really good sales. And then within the next few months, I was just practicing on everybody who I knew. And then COVID hit. And I lost my job. And luckily here in Canada, we had those CERB checks. So they were $2,000 a month. And that was able to kind of like get me by a little bit, at least pay both mine and my partner's bills. And so I just jumped into my business full time. I actually left my job before that. I didn't lose it. I left it, and then I kind of wanted it back because COVID hit.
Stability, yeah.
I decided I was just going to jump into photography full time because I was making enough money at it. But then, COVID hit, and I just was a little nervous. So about 6 months into having the business, I only learned photography in July. Started the business in August, got registered and everything.
Wow.
And about 6 months after that, I was full-time, and I'd booked 40 weddings in my first year.
Okay, let's just pause there for a second, because I 40 weddings within, what, like 6 months or something like that, or less?
Within 6 months, yeah.
That is wild.
There's lots of things that went into it, though.
Yeah.
My poor boyfriend didn't really have a girlfriend for
Okay. I probably shouldn't laugh, but I guess maybe in hindsight we can, right?
we can laugh in hindsight.
Okay.
But I mean, I just knew that I wanted to work for myself. I was very tired of being held back by whoever I was working for, because they looked at me and I was 22 years old and I wasn't, old enough to make whatever decisions. And like, man, I'm trying to help you here. I can make you more money and make it more efficient or make your customers happier. And nobody would listen to me. So I was like, well, I'm just going to do it for myself then. And I'm so glad that I did, because I know that I jumped into wedding photography just so that I could work for myself. But I obviously fell in love with photography. What's not to love about it? It's so much fun, and I love human connection, and it's just a really, really great job. So there's 1,000,001 things that went into being able to book that many weddings in my first 6 months.
Let's how many, if you were to pick, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, how many kind of key principles immediately come to mind? That, because I've got my pen, I'm going to literally take notes here.
I'm trying to organize which ones would be the top ones.
Sure.
Really just trying every marketing tactic that you can and seeing what's going to work. I did everything. I went out and I offered free headshots and branding photos to every single wedding planner that I could find on the internet. I went out to Revelstoke. I went down to Penticton, which mean nothing to you, but they're pretty far from where I live.
Sure.
And just made connections with them. I also put together videos for venues that I would want to work at. In the early stages, I did 2 weddings for free. They both ended up giving me money, and they ended up getting really good photos out of it, so lucky them. But I did those 2 for free, and then once I had enough, and then I also second shot for another wedding photographer. For those of you who are like, what the heck, this woman just jumped into wedding photography without any experience.
Well, but your photos are I would assume that you've shot for 5-10 years. I mean, your work is beautiful. So I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm like, who would question when they look at your work? It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was lucky. I learned from Matt Morgan Photography in Kelowna. He took me under his wing and taught me a bunch of stuff about wedding photography and let me shadow him and second shoot for him at weddings. And then, actually, I'm all over the place. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. We're going to just keep listing them. We're going to come back to each of these. We'll kind of explore them a little bit, but keep going.
Okay. When COVID hit, everybody was doing those front porch sessions. Do you remember those?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where families who were stuck at home could come out on their front porch. A photographer would stay on the sidewalk and take photos for them by donation. I was doing about 10 of those a day for like 3 weeks. So I got so much practice so quickly with all of these different dynamics of people, and also having a background in customer like experience really in the food and beverage industry. And I was doing like horseback tours and a bunch of other stuff, but just working with all of these different kinds of people and learning how to read them well, I think is really what contributed to my ability to give a good customer experience. And then I was also able to use all of the photos that I did by donation and for free in my marketing. So after I did all of that at a very, very low rate, I actually got onto Groupon. So I made my website and everything, and I submitted to Groupon and got a whole bunch of photo shoots that way. And that was actually how I started making money at photography, even though my skill wasn't all there yet.
Sure.
And then once I had enough money and I showed that I was capable of making revenue, I applied for a grant, and half of it was a business loan and the other half was a grant. And I just invested in the equipment that I needed. I just right out the gate got 2 Mark IVs and 1.4 or 3514 and an 8514.
Nice.
And then I just practiced a lot and then implemented every single marketing tactic that I could. Before COVID hit, we actually had a bridal show, and I just learned about the bridal show like 2 days before it happened, and my partner and my friend and I put together like 400 of these like scrolls. They were super cute. They were these scrolls with like twine that was wrapped around them, and it had my pricing and my about me and stuff like that. And I had little mini cupcakes and just a bunch of marketing material, and all of my photos like really, really nicely printed with like twinkle lights and stuff like that. And I just went hard that day. I've never drank one before, but I had one of those 24-hour energy things.
Oh, wow.
I
think they're called 5-hour. Do they have a 24-hour one?
There's a 24-hour one.
Is there really? Oh, wow.
And I'm pretty sure it was anyway, but I just made sure that I was 100% myself. I stood in front of my booth, and I made friends with every single person who went by my booth. I also offered 15% off any of my wedding packages to anybody who had the scroll when they were booking.
Cool.
So that alone got me about 20 weddings just from that bridal show.
Wow.
And lots of connections with a lot of the venues and stuff like that. But I think my major success with that was really you just have to make a personal connection. I'd already read How to Win Friends and Influence People by this point. I asked people how their day was, asked them what their name was, and then I kept saying their name. And you can implement all of these different things to really make a connection with the people who are you are prospecting. And,
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, and I'm sure you could keep going. There's probably a list. I mean, you talked about how you were trying with all these different things. I've literally, you probably saw me looking down, but I have a notebook here that I'm writing things down with a pen, old school style. It's because I'm just listing all these different things you were talking about. So I want to at least go back and touch on a few of them. And by the way, Andre said that crazy 40 weddings in 6 months during a pandemic. And he makes a great point because, I mean, 40 weddings just getting started would be wild. But to do that in a time when people are a little bit freaked out and unsure of what's going to happen next, I mean, it just speaks loudly for the amount of work that you put in. It's really, really incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so let's go back and touch on some of these. And I keep looking down because I've got this notebook here, but I'm going to just kind of read off. So free headshots. And this is something that I've talked about on the podcast before multiple times over, especially in the context of outsourcing editing. People think, okay, I'm going to spend, whatever it is, $50, $100, a couple $100, depending on if it's a session or a wedding, to outsource editing. and I'm going to try to make that money back. And my argument is, no, don't just simply make that money back. You're going to actually make more if you spend time investing in relationships. And one of the ways that you can do that is by adding value to the potential relationships that you want to establish, especially with a wedding coordinator, for example. So I love that you did these free headshots. How did you go about sharing that you were offering these free headshots, and what type of people or businesses did you share that with?
Anybody who would take my email.
Okay.
Anybody in the wedding industry. I've started with wedding planners and coordinators, and that gave me enough work as was. And I figured that they're the ones who I needed to connect with first anyway,
100%.
because, and then generally people have already booked a wedding photographer by the time they get to like their bridal gown and the venue, or no, sorry, I connect with venues, but by the time they get their bridal gown and like florals and stuff like that. So I stuck with venues and wedding planners, and I just honestly sent them an email. I said, hey, like, things must be absolutely nuts for you right now. Like, everybody has to reschedule their weddings, and you've got like 8 to 12 vendors that you have to reschedule per client that you have. Like, I just want to reach out and say, hey, like, I'm sorry that things are crazy for you right now, but I want to give you some free photos, so that, I don't know, just to show my gratitude. And
you probably notice I'm smiling. I'm not laughing at you. I'm thinking about how I think that was one of the first principles that Dale Carnegie talks about in his book. Make the conversation about them. How do you add value to their life rather than talking about yourself? Make it about them. And I love that you lead with empathy in that. It's like, hey, things must be crazy. And naturally people are going to be like, yeah, they really are crazy. And this person's thinking about the fact that things are crazy for me. Even if there's not this conscious process going on inside their mind, the fact that you're showing them that attention and showing that empathy really is a great way to lead a conversation like that.
Yeah, I try to make all my conversations about the other person, if possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, they all of them got back to me. I got to meet with all of them. All of them have given me weddings. A lot of them, actually. One of them, her and we're really good friends now, and we are putting together 2 days of elopements, and we've got 7 couples on each days, and we've got them almost fully booked already. Wow. I've done collaborations with another one, and I've just been hired by all of the other ones like at least twice. And I put in about 4 hours of work for them, realistically, like between the emails and doing the headshots and branding photos for them. And we usually ended up going for like a tea or like a glass of wine after and just hanging out and becoming friends, and spend that time creating relationships with people, because it's really worth it. And going out of your way to be kind to other people will benefit you 100%. And I can't remember what book it was in, but without doing it for a selfish reason, if you can be selfless towards other people and just always try to help other people, it will always come back to you, no matter what.
I think that intention is so important. And again, it may seem cliche to a lot of people to hear that. And they're like, oh yeah, of course, you'd be nice to people. But I think it's so easy, and I've certainly seen it, whether in the wedding industry or the photography industry or otherwise. It's easy for people to go into a mode kind of behaving the way that they think they're supposed to, but that comes off fake, and you can see right through it. When there's genuine intention behind of kindness behind what it is that we do in the interaction with people, whether it's another photographer or a vendor or a client, I know personally that it pays off. I'm kind of crazy because even when I send a text message, I put intention into my text messages. Like when I send an emoji, sometimes I'm actually smiling when I put that smile emoji there in the text message. I think there's something to be said for that kind of intention, because it's going to, whether it translates immediately or translates in the long run, people are going to see that kindness, and it's obviously already benefiting your business. And I think it's okay that you ultimately benefit from it on a business level, but as an individual and the impact that you're making in people's lives, and also the benefit for you actually establishing real relationships, not just these fake things just for the sake of business, I think it's wonderful. We could literally stop at that point and our listeners would have plenty to go work on. I think this is really good stuff, but I do want to keep going. I'm going to pick up my notebook here one more time. So you talked about the significance of connection. I think we've kind of highlighted at this point free headshots and the significance of connection, relationships. We could call that number 2. but those really go hand in hand. Number 3, you talked about creating videos, free videos. Talk a little bit more about that process, because photography is your specialty. Did you just kind of figure out how to do videos for venues, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I bought a gimbal and everything.
Wow.
I only used it actually for those videos that I made, and I haven't used it since. But I did video tours of the venues that I wanted to work at. So I grew up rodeoing and living in the bush. I lived off grid until I was like 13, I think.
Wow.
So I wanted the backcountry barn venues. That's
Sure.
And the reason why is that the people who book those venues are likely going to be the same kind of people I want to work with.
Makes sense,
so,
yeah.
I did video tours for them, and I had a buddy come with a drone, and we put together, and then I just outsourced the editing because I'm not an editor. I just don't enjoy being on my computer.
I feel you.
But I outsourced the editing, and they put together a really beautiful video tour. And I even paid for that editing. I paid a buddy of mine $100 a video to stitch together all of the not awesome footage that I took. And he salvaged whatever he could, and he made a really, really nice video for all of these venues.
Yeah.
And they gave me credit on their website, and now we've got a connection, and they have put me as one of their preferred photographers on their package that they send out to all their clients, which has also gotten me business. But so, I mean, really, the 3 hours that took me plus the $100 in exchange for a wedding, like, make 30 times the amount of money, it's definitely worth it to put that time and effort in.
That's really great. And I'm sure we could spend a bunch of time there, but we have more to cover, so I'm going to leave that. But props to you for going outside your comfort zone on what you knew and just making it happen. And I mean, honestly, it's certainly been easy, even in my career, despite all the hard work that I have put in, to also at times kind of take the easy way out, you know? And I just have a lot of respect for the fact that you just, first of all, being new to the industry, regardless of the fact that you're new to the industry, you just went like head down and went all in and tried to come up with, as you said earlier, all kinds of different ways to be able to market your business. And ultimately, it seems like a lot of it centers around relationships, which is just a win-win in the end for everybody. The next point that I wrote down was free weddings. You said you photographed some free weddings. I think this is great. It's an opportunity to develop portfolio, relationships, potentially get referrals down the road. How did you put that out there?
I said, hey, I'm new to photography. I really want to get into wedding photography. I'll do your wedding for free. Here's some photos that I've taken. And I had 2 lovely souls. One of them ended up working for me later, who put their trust into me, and they
Cool.
just let me show up and take some photos. One of the weddings, actually, there was a girl who was the best friend of the bride, and she was a wedding photographer, and she's a really great photographer, so it was really nerve-wracking for me. She was kind of like giving me tips, and I was just so nervous. It was like my first wedding, and, and this is really good photographer like glaring at me because I'm like taking photos of her best friend's wedding, and she just wants to make sure that they're good. But so I honestly just put it on like Craigslist and like Facebook groups in the local area, like local wedding Facebook groups and stuff, and said, hey, like, these are some photos that I've taken, I'll do it for free. So if photography for some people is not necessarily that high, which is crazy to me, but not high in like value to them, they were the ones who put their trust in me. And then sure. I just did my best. I rented a 70-200 2.8 and made sure that I got like really, really good images. And I worked really hard at it, and could then use that as marketing material, because when you're trying to get into the wedding industry, like, nobody's going to hire you if they don't know that you've already done it. Nobody's going to pay you to do something that you have no experience in. So, and if they do that, they're crazy, because weddings are a beast. Like, there's really can be, so much. There's so much in the day, and you get so burnt out throughout the day. Like, you need to be on your toes. So I think that was actually really integral to getting into the business. Like, I don't know what I would have done otherwise, really. I just made sure that I kept on shooting after that as much as I could.
Yeah, but I think you make a really great point, which is that there is a market for people who, you either aren't interested or as interested in photography. They don't hold as high esteem in their mind, or maybe they just don't have the budget for a more expensive wedding photographer, and there's opportunity for new photographers to be able to still serve that client, and then also have the opportunity to be able to develop a portfolio and some experience. I mean, that needs to happen in the end. My first wedding I shot for $350, and that wedding that wedding actually was, well, it ended up costing me more than that to get the film developed, because I was shooting film. This is back in 2001. I borrowed a camera. I had one camera. It was an inexpensive, like, consumer level film camera, 35 millimeter camera. And then I borrowed a second one. A friend of mine, somebody that I worked with, had the same camera, so I was familiar with it. I borrowed that to put black and white film in. And I went and shot this thing, and ultimately lost money on it. But the couple that hired me were willing to put their trust in me. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but at that first wedding, I actually missed the kiss. I don't remember exactly what happened technically.
Oh, no.
But I missed the kiss. So after the ceremony happened, I went to them. I said, "Look, this is what happened. Would it be okay? Can we go back into the sanctuary and set up the shot? Would that be okay with you?" They were super kind, super gracious, super patient, and were willing to do that. We went back in with the wedding party and the minister. We set up the shot in their proof album. Of course, we had individual proofs. In their proof album, it looked just like it happened during the ceremony. So they got the picture, and it was fine, and they were happy in the end. But yeah, there are some risks involved when we first get started. But putting the time and effort and energy and studying up front, and then finding clients who are willing to work with, who are gracious enough to work with us, that's a great opportunity to ultimately capitalize on. And I think that's good. You mentioned front porch sessions, and I wanted to kind of list that as our next item here that you brought up. And I know that it was a very popular thing, especially at the height of the pandemic. Was there a particular way that you approached those front porch sessions? Like, how did you get the word out, and then how did you go about the actual shoot itself?
I actually put some money into it, funnily enough. People are probably also thinking that's crazy, but I put it all over Facebook groups. That caught enough traction as is, but I knew that I just wanted as much practice as I could with people.
Sure.
And some people were paying me a decent amount as well. But I just put them on local Facebook groups, and you have to be persistent. Like, you can't just post things once and hope that people will see them. Like, they're not going to. Only like 6% of the people, I think, who follow you are actually going to see what you post. So you need to post it multiple times to make sure that they catch on. I posted about it probably a dozen times, and I actually put up an Instagram ad to local people in Kelowna. We didn't put that much money into it. And it was great. It boosted my following immensely. And so I booked a couple of weddings through it as well, actually. Two of the people who I photographed during the front porch sessions contacted me later for engagement photos, and then now I'm doing their wedding.
That's so cool.
So I guess it did really pay off. But
absolutely. But it gave you an opportunity to develop portfolio, like you said, also build up a following, and then ultimately book more clients for your wedding business, which is incredible. And I'm sure there are variations on this that photographers, our listeners, could kind of implement in order to build up that kind of portfolio and experience, doing quick mini sessions, if you will.
I just remember something, and I don't want to forget it.
Yeah.
It's so integral in my business, actually. I don't know why I didn't talk about this sooner. But I invested in SEO. So I hired somebody, because I did all the research on my own, and I learned as much as I could about SEO. For those who don't know, it's search engine optimization, and it's what helps your website rank higher than other people's on Google and Bing and Yahoo. Because I think Safari uses Bing. But anyway, I hired a guy I actually traded headshots for him. Okay. And he did all of the on-page work for me. That's the best part about the service industry, is that you can trade work.
Absolutely.
But anyway, he did all of the on-page work for me. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on your actual website for SEO. And now I pay him $500 a month, which might sound crazy, but he has made me the #1 ranking in almost all of my keywords now. I think I have like 43 keywords.
Wow.
So when you search like Kelowna wedding photographer, Kelowna headshot photographer, Kelowna photographer, like any of the keywords, I'm also now starting to rank really high for BC photographer, like our whole province.
Wow.
So that's actually a lot of my traffic is just people, because a lot of the wedding clients in Kelowna are from outside of Kelowna because it's just such a beautiful area.
It's so amazing. I had the chance to go once for a friend's wedding, and oh my word, one of the most beautiful places I've had the opportunity to visit. Yeah, incredible.
Yeah. So people who aren't from here aren't following a photographer from Kelowna. So when they search on Google, I'm the one who pops up first. And people generally skip over ads and they won't go past the first page. Realistically, they will stick to the top 3 people who are on Google, and then they're not going to go past that because usually they can find what they need. And yeah, they've created a connection already. So I put a lot of money into SEO for sure, but the amount of money that I've received back, like the ROI is just crazy. So if you haven't looked into SEO, and like SEO might be a little bit out of the budget, but I would try to make it a priority.
How did you go about finding the right person in that case? Because especially without having a budget for a massive SEO company to come in and do work for you, it seems like everybody and their brother and sister is an SEO specialist. How do you know? Yeah. How do you find the right person, somebody that you can trust? How did you find the right person that you could trust?
I just went on a Facebook, again, it's Facebook, but it was like a small business group or entrepreneurs group or something. And I posted on every single Facebook. I think it's posted on like probably about 20 different pages saying like, I'm looking for somebody to help me with SEO. I'm hoping that I can trade for headshots at the beginning, and then this is my budget. And I had a few people respond, and I picked Aaron with Wildfire SEO, and he's been great. We've built a really good relationship, and
cool.
Yeah, so I would highly recommend, if you haven't looked into SEO for your website, you should absolutely do that.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw within the last few months as high as about 50% of our new accounts coming into Photographer's Edit from organic Google search. And then we had an SEO specialist come back. We do this every so often. We'll have a specialist take a look at our site and what we're doing and look at how we can improve. And right now we're in the process of making significant changes, actually, that are taking us weeks on end for improvement to our SEO at the end of the day. And so I'm right there with you. I'd highly recommend it for our listeners. Mm-hmm. You've given us so much value already, and we only have so much time left. Just very quickly though, so we've talked about free headshots. Really, we could top the list with the significance of relationships, developing true relationships, connections, because that really will pay off in the end, not only personally, but professionally as well. But then free headshots, which of course is a way to build relationships as well. The videos, or creating videos for venues, incredible idea. Of course, free weddings, especially to develop a portfolio and develop experience. The front porch sessions or mini sessions. And of course, this is still applicable even outside of the height of the pandemic, because photographers can do these mini sessions, whether front porch or otherwise, and develop a lot of experience and build a portfolio. And I think that's really great. SEO, enough can't be said about that. Photos for free for marketing. We've kind of touched on this. We talked about free headshots, but were you actually photographing venues and giving those images to them? Were you shooting an event and then giving some of the images from the event to the venue? What did that look like?
I did a lot of free work at the beginning.
Okay. So just offering it to vendors, to locations, to I don't know, bridal shops or otherwise?
Yep, lots of collaborations. Okay. Again, it's all just connections. Most of this you can learn from Taylor Jackson as well.
Shout out to Taylor. He's actually going to be on the podcast here in about 2 weeks.
Oh, I love that. Oh, yeah. I love him so much. He responded to I tagged him in my story, and he responded and my heart melted.
He's awesome.
He is really great. So he's got a program called Full Time in whatever year it is, and I did the Full Time in 2020. And cool. A lot of I would 100% recommend following him. He's got a lot of really great stuff as well. And then just reading and listening to as many business and marketing books as you can, because marketing is what you should really be focusing on. As much if not more as your focusing on building your craft and getting better at photography or videography.
Yeah.
Because marketing is what's going to get you more business. And if you can master all of the techniques in business and marketing, you will be absolutely fine.
Such a great recommendation. I have to touch on one last thing that you mentioned, Groupon.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Groupon.
Oh, yeah.
This is a big one, and I know we don't have so much time, but like, give us the 60-second
okay.
spiel with Groupon. Is that, because I know it's a loaded topic. It was really popular, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, for photographers, especially to your point, photographers kind of getting started and needing to drum up business. But what was your approach with Groupon? How did you see the success that you did there?
I set my prices really high on my website that were not at all what I was charging in real life.
Okay.
Because they cut the price by like 70%.
Okay.
So I was only making, I think, $50 a shoot. But I was getting practice, and that's really all that I cared about in the beginning was practicing.
Sure.
And getting better at photography so that I could start charging a lot more. And it worked. I practiced a lot. I got really good at photography and managed to boost my rates there. But yeah, it was kind of a pain because people who are looking for the cheapest option are generally not very easy to work with.
A little higher maintenance.
And they want to see, want to see how much more that they can cut from you. So
right.
It was kind of hard that way. But I also made wedding clients and lifelong clients throughout that as well. So it was just an additional way for me to meet new people and get to work with people.
Well, I think, there's so many here, and you really summed it up. I'm again looking at my list in the notebook here, but experiment with every marketing tactic. You've mentioned that multiple times over, and you've listed some really great ideas here for our listeners too. But at the end of the day, it really does take trying a bunch of different things and seeing what sticks. Again, I have so much respect though for your work ethic and the fact that you just threw down and went all in. And not only do you set a great example for our listeners in that way, but your practical ideas here, the ones that work, that translated to 40 weddings booked in 6 months, still mind-blowing to me. It's just a really great example for our listeners, great information as well. And so I thank you, Paul. This has been really, really good stuff. Remind our listeners, I'm going to pop this up on screen, but remind our listeners real quick, if you will, where they can find you online, follow what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm Photos by Paula Mikayla. It's PALAMIKAYLA on all of my social channels.
Cool.
And my website is paulasphotos.com.
Cool, and I'm going to pop that there on screen as well. For everybody listening to the audio version of this, we will have a replay, the video replay that you can see if you go to facebook.com/Bokeh Podcast. You can watch the video replay. And if you've got any questions for Paula, or you just want to see what she's doing, her work is beautiful. You need to follow her. Make sure that you do. And just go to Paula's Photos, PALASphotos.com, and follow her. Thanks again, Paula. I really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Nathan. It was